Tony, good afternoon, brother. How are you?
I'm well, Alex. How are you?
I'm fantastic, man. It's beautiful in Columbus, Ohio, other than being hot and sticky, but it sounds like you're getting some of the cool and rain weather. So, it doesn't matter what the weather is. We always complain.
Yeah, we could use the rain. It's been very dry here. We're on the watering ban here. You know.
So, Tony, tell me a little bit about yourself, who you are, and what you've been up to over the last couple of years. And then I'd love to go back and hear about some of your history.
Sure. Yeah. So I am a brewmaster by trade. I started with Anheuser-Busch in their brewmaster training program. 2 days out of college, I drove from Manchester, New Hampshire to St. Louis, Missouri, and started at 6 in the morning in their research pilot brewery.
So, what,
And
what year would that have probably been?
that was '89.
All right. So, this was
Yeah.
way before beer was nearly as cool and hip as it is today.
Yeah. It was just right at not even at the. I mean, the craft brewing movement hadn't even taken off yet. I remember I was a home brewer as well, and I brought
Mm.
I brought a 6 pack of my home brew into the research brewery, and they laughed at me. I
Ah,
made I made an IPA, and they're like, "No one will ever drink that."
oh,
Um,
boy. You were just before
yeah,
your time, man.
yeah. So I worked in
Can I ask
brewing
how
for.
how you got into that Anheuser-Busch training program? Was that, like, difficult to get into?
Yeah, it was a pretty competitive job application, and this is a really interesting story. So I was married and I had a 1 year old. My son Christian, who's my business partner in this business, Motion, um, was 1 year old when we were graduating from college, and I sent my resume in. I was a biology major, and I sent my resume into the local Anheuser-Busch brewery. I grew up in New Hampshire. There's a brewery in Merrimack, New Hampshire. And I sent it in there. It ended up getting sent to St. Louis because I had done some really interesting undergraduate research, couple projects that were kind of cool. And so I end up getting this interview down in St. Louis for this brewmaster training program, and I was told there were a couple hundred applicants for the one role
Mm.
at the time, and they generally took chemical engineers into the program, but they were interviewing me, I guess because of my this interesting research that I had done.
Mm.
And so the way it works there, or it did at the time, was there were 5 interviews the first day. You rotate through a couple VPs and the managers, et cetera. And I finished the interview um, with a guy named Don Burnell, who was the VP of Human Resources for globally for Anheuser-Busch. And I'll never forget, we're sitting there talking, and he's looking at my transcript, and he pulls it out, and he's like, "Hey, I wasn't a great student, right?" So he's like, "Hey, you want to talk about your GPA?" And I'm like, "Oh my god!" I'm like, "Oh, this is it. My it was a flash in the pan. I'm not gonna get this job, right?" So I took a second and I just said to him, "Look, Dr. Burnell, I'm going to tell you something. The only 4.0 I ever got in my life was in blood alcohol content."
Yeah.
So, anyways, we both laughed. We finished this interview. They're telling me it's going to be several weeks before I hear anything. And as we go to finish, he says, "You got anything else for me?" I said, "Well, I'm a little disappointed." And he's like, "Why? What are you disappointed about?" I said, "Well, I figured that if I was interviewing for the brewmaster training program, that you would ask me the most important question, that you could ask somebody interviewing at Budweiser." And he's like, "What's that question?" Right, here we go. And so he's got all sorts of beers on his, around his office and stuff. And I pick up a bottle of Budweiser off of his desk, and there's a little banner at the top of a Bud thing, and in it there's a paragraph there.
Mhm.
I said, this quote right here, you don't. I figured you'd be asking me. He's like, "Really?" I said, "Yeah." So, like, this is the famous Budweiser beer. We know of no brand produced by any other brewer which costs so much to brew and age. Our exclusive Beechwood aging produces a taste, a smoothness, and a drinkability you will find in no other beer at any price. And he just died, right? And so next thing I know, they ship me off. And I within a couple of days, I got a call back to go back for another interview, for another
Nice.
set of interviews. And so that was in April. That was in April of '89. I started on I graduated from college on May 30th, Saturday, kissed my wife and kid goodbye, left them in New Hampshire, and I drove in a Ford Escort from Manchester, New Hampshire to St. Louis, Missouri, and started that Monday morning.
Wow.
So,
Now you were interested in kind of home brewing at that time. Were there
yeah.
other breweries that were like comparable? Because I know you said that this was prior to like the microbrewery kind of world, or
Yeah, there
those that
were,
were
I mean,
similar.
there were, at the time back then, there was really, Anchor Steam, right? There was the major brewers, Miller, Coors, Anheuser-Busch. And then in the craft world, there was really Anchor Steam beer. There was um, Boston Beer was around, but
Okay.
but there were very few craft breweries out there. And so I did not anticipate becoming a brewer. I anticipated working in the laboratory. That's
Interesting.
that was that's why I had sent my resume and I figured I could work in the lab. But it worked out for me, and it was life changing for me. It was a great opportunity because um, you know Anheuser-Busch is actually one of the most technically sound brewing organizations in the world. They because they're so big and they've been doing it for 100 and whatever it is years.
Hmm.
They really know the brewing science, and so I was able to learn in this research brewery. Um, everything. I even malted my own grains while I was there.
What does that mean?
And so I took raw barley and I would grow it in these specialized compartments and convert it into malt, which is the base ingredient for making beer.
Hmm.
So it was for me it was a fantastic experience, and I do think it sort of helped put me on, well, it did put me on my path for my career, and it's paid dividends for me over time. So I spent 36 years in the brewing industry, and I worked.
Not all at Anheuser-Busch though, correct?
No, no, I worked at AB, then I worked with Coors. I owned my own brew pubs, and I worked for Miller Coors. And my last gig was as the vice president of brewing and quality for Mark Anthony Brewing, which are the guys that make White Claw and things like Cayman Jack and Mike's Hard Lemonade and so forth.
Hmm.
So I did that for 13 years, and then I retired last summer and started this business with my son Christian.
All right. So take me back. You said you went from Anheuser-Busch to Miller. What? How did that? Or you just did course?
Well, yeah. So what first? So I went back to. I started with Anheuser Busch, and then the craft beer thing started happening.
Hmm.
Right. That's when I decided I was going to go do my own brew pubs. So
Okay. So you
I
wanted to start a brew pub, or were you like brewery and restaurant, or just like
yeah.
I'm going to brew and sell?
I really wasn't that interested in the restaurant side, but I definitely wanted to do the brewing side.
Hmm.
And I met a group of people that were putting together a brew pub concept. It was the same sort of group that had way back in like '86. Boston, remember Boston Market used to be called Boston Chicken.
I don't
Um,
remember that, but I do remember Boston Market.
yeah, and so it used to be called Boston Chicken, and they went from 1 unit to 30, and then they decided that they wanted to go national,
Yep, correct.
and they ended up going public. And at the time, this was before .com. It was one of the most successful IPOs in history in the U.S.
Hmm.
And now it pales in comparison to the IPOs that happen today. But it was considered a really successful IPO. Well, that group decided they wanted to do the same thing in the brew pub business.
Hmm.
And so they recruited me and I joined, and I led that brewing organization for a couple of years and decided that I wanted to go back into just principal brewing, into the industry itself. And so that's when I went over to Coors. I worked in the Memphis plant for Coors for a number of years.
What wasn't working for you with that kind of micro
Yeah,
brew organization?
yeah, it just, I felt I didn't, I wasn't exactly in sync with the concept outside of the brewery. Meaning, I if I were to open another brew pub, I'd still want to do the same thing where it was a much more casual softball teams coming in, that sort of thing. This was a high end brew pub.
Oh,
So
interesting.
yeah, which it didn't quite work for me, and I don't. And in the end, it didn't quite work for anyone because after I left, after a few more years, they ended up rolling up the business. Um, but it was more. I wanted to celebrate the beer more than it was was happening at that in that concept.
Yeah, because when I think of like high end, and this is no disrespect to beer, but I think wine, I think cocktails. Those are like my one and two. I mean, almost like if you go to like a fancy restaurant, like a Michelin star restaurant, they probably have like 3 beers on the menu, and
Yeah,
that's it.
and it wasn't quite like it wasn't quite at that level. Um, but it was after a softball team finishes a game, they weren't coming into our
It wasn't like a Buffalo Wild Wings or an
right.
Applebee's or like
Yeah,
some chain that you could see in like every city, and yeah, just, "Hey, we're gonna go, relax on a Sunday afternoon," kinda thing.
yeah, and our the margin on the beer was great, and so the beer side, I think it was something like 30% of the revenue, but 50% of the company profit.
So what's the difference between making beer on a crazy industrial level? We actually you know this. We have a Budweiser plant here in Columbus, Ohio. It's right next to the highway. You can't miss it. Got these two giant towers. One said Budweiser, one says Bud Light, and it's constantly got little plumes of smoke coming out, which I'm sure is the brewing process in works. What's the difference between brewing like on that level, and maybe they even have a larger brewery like in St. Louis,
Yeah.
versus like for this place, or even just a micro brewery that we're going to see, whatever on the side of the road in any city now in the United States?
Yeah, I think the biggest difference with between the breweries is, at a pub level, there's a lot less technology in the actual brewery.
Okay.
So things like temperature control of cooking vessels, or temperature control of a fermenter, or the condition of the atmosphere within the cellars. There's just a lot more precision capability in a larger brewery, um, because of the technology built into the equipment.
Because Budweiser wants a Budweiser to taste like a Budweiser, regardless of where
Yeah,
you buy it. And that
exactly.
may not be as important to the guy who's selling, 1,000 of these pints, a month.
Right. Yeah, so that's exactly right. And so they're trying to make a very consistent product across the country. Um, and in a brew pub, sometimes you miss a temperature when you're cooking or mashing. That changes, maybe the alcohol content, and so there are different things that can happen. And those things can happen in a large brewery too, but there's a lot of backup systems in order to keep you from going too far afield in a big commercial brewery. Whereas in a small brewery, everything's manual. I'm checking temperatures with a thermometer that I stick in the mash instead of a temperature probe or three temperature probes that are in a tank telling me what's going on. Um,
So maybe break it down for me very simply. Like, what's the process like to make beer? I know I've heard it kind of once. I had an individual on the podcast way early on, like one of the first 10 or 20 episodes or something. But remind me, like, let's say we're starting beer from scratch. Like, what are we going to probably do?
Yeah. So you every beer starts with malt, which is barley that's been germinated under controlled conditions in order to get the enzymes to be expressed throughout that kernel, and to free up the starches that are available in that kernel.
And what
So
do
you
you
have
mean when
these.
you say germination?
So that's a controlled growth program.
Okay.
So it's like if you were to drop seeds, any type of seed, sort of in water, and allow it to start to germinate, you'll see a rootlet come out, and we call it an acrospire. Some other parts of
I,
these.
I got a snake plant to my right that I'm water propagating. So yeah, it's got little
Yeah,
fingers shooting out the bottom. So you've
yeah,
started basically like the sort of like seeding process or growing process essentially.
exactly. And then you stop it at a very specific time, because you don't want to overgrow it, because the more the more roots you have, and the more of this acrospire that starts to grow, that's taking away from the starch that you want to convert into alcohol. So you bring it to a certain point, and you arrest it with heat, and you dry it out. Then that malt, that's now malt, you grind it up and infuse it with water, and then you go through a temperature. It's a temperature ramp, really, in order to activate specific enzymes at specific times to be able to break down proteins or to be able to break down large or small.
Are you
Um,
adding that enzyme, or is that enzyme naturally occurring already in that germinated plant?
it can be both ways. When I was at AB, it was natural. There was no added enzymes in there, but there are enzymes that are available commercially that you can take and put it into the mash and help convert more starches than otherwise. Um, so that whole process in the brew house.
And that enzyme, sorry, it's starting to eat on that carb. Is that right?
Yeah. So what it does is, let's say this is my hand is a carbohydrate.
Yep.
The enzymes come in and they start chopping these my fingers off
And enzymes
because
they're not living. This is not a living thing.
no, an enzyme is a protein, but it has a specific role, or they have specific roles in how they interact with carbohydrates or
So it's
other
not like a
things.
yeast, which is living. We haven't introduced
Exactly.
anything like that yet. Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. So the reason that you chop it up, those starches into smaller fermentable sugars is what we call them, is because the yeast can only consume certain sizes and certain types of sugars,
Mm.
and so the enzymes sort of do the are the sous chefs of brewing, right? They're prepping everything, and then the yeast cell comes in, and after we've extracted all of that, we cool the product. We add the hops, then we cool the product, and then it goes into a fermenter with the yeast, and the yeast then has that those sugars are now available for the yeast to consume.
What are those hops doing? Okay, so basically all we had so far was we've got this malted barley that's grown a little bit. We stopped it.
Mhm.
We added some enzymes, or the enzymes were naturally occurring. They kind of broke that down a little bit. Now you're saying you're adding hops. What are hops and what are those doing?
Yeah. So once that barley has been converted and we've made that mash, we separate that liquid from the mash. So imagine it's like a big spaghetti strainer, right? But it's full of grain,
Yeah.
and so you get some liquid out the bottom, but you're holding the grain back. So we remove that liquid, which is called wort, um, and we put it into another vessel we call the kettle, and you start to boil it. And, boiling those that wort helps to do a number of things. It produces flavor, produces color, it volatilizes organics that you don't want in the beer
Hmm.
up the stack, which is probably what you're seeing when you
Hmm.
drive by the Columbus Brewery.
Most likely.
Um, and then and it also condenses it, and so that sort of thing. It also gives us the opportunity to add hops, which are a cone shaped um, flower. It's actually it's like a cousin of cannabis, but it has typically those hops have what we call alpha acids or beta acids embedded in there.
Hmm.
And when you boil a hop, it releases those alpha acids. They become 9 times more bitter, and that's what gives the beer its bitterness and its aroma. And if you were to taste a beer that was without any hops, it would taste very, very differently. Um,
Taste sweeter.
it would taste sweeter, but because you're used to beer, it would taste off.
It
You
wouldn't
know,
taste like it wouldn't really taste much like a beer.
yeah, no, it wouldn't. So the hops give the beer sort of its finishing character.
I had two questions. One, what happens to all that barley that was drained out? Does that get used for anything?
It most often is sold for cattle feed. It's
Okay.
still got quite a bit of protein in it and nutritional value, and it's often sold as cattle feed.
And then the second thing is, do all beers use hops?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, there may be a few exceptions, but it would be really rare. Nothing that's really
Been
what I would say
commercial
is
in
a
any
big
way, shape, or
big
form?
commercial. Yeah, yeah,
Interesting. And that's just because that hop has that kind of specific profile with those bitterness and that acid and that chemical that helps combine with the wort, as you said.
Yep, that's correct. Yep.
Okay, so you've added the hops and you're boiling, right? You're boiling, cooking, boiling, cooking. What happens next?
So so you add hops at different points during the boil. Once that's all done,
And is
um,
that sorry, is that how you would make a different type of beer? A pilsner, an ale, or IPA, or a brown ale, or a red ale?
yeah, so you would be using, so malt can come in many different forms. So some of them have more color, some of them have more flavor,
Okay,
some of them have more fermentability. You can use raw barley, for instance, when you're making stout, as part of your grain bill. So you use a mixture of different malts,
I see.
or adjuncts, which are anything you put in there that's not technically malt. So things like corn or rice. Um, and those are pure starches. So those don't, all they contribute is extra fermentability. So when you put an adjunct like a corn or a starch into a beer, it actually allows you to get a, um, sort of higher alcohol content without having sort of all the protein that comes with that you might extract from a malt at this, that sort of thing.
Is that where you guys
And
came up with the old Bud Light Platinum? Is that where that was coming from?
yeah, so what happens is that it makes more fermentable sugar, um, and then what you do is you ferment it all out, get a higher alcohol than you would sell the product at, and that way you can then add water and bring it down to
Hmm.
that target alcohol, and so that's how you can get lower calories because you've reduced the alcohol, and then you don't have the things like the protein or the excess
So
carbohydrate
is
that
that
you
how a product like Bud Light is made, where it's you're essentially
absolutely.
brewing kind of like a Budweiser esque, and then adding some water and watering it down, making it less calories, less alcohol, similar
Yeah,
to?
in big commercial breweries, it's something there's high gravity brewing, and then there's high fermentability brewing as well. There, so high gravity means you take a you take your grain bill. Say I'm in a brew pub, right? I brew it what we call sales strength, generally in a brew pub, and so you brew it. Whatever you come out with is what you come out with, because we don't have you can blend these down, but it's just simpler, to brew it at sales gravity at a brew pub.
Got it.
In large commercial breweries, they will often employ high gravity brewing, which is you take your, that grain bill, and you concentrate that grain bill up by say 25%, so that you can use the same size tank, but you can get 25% more volume out of that same size tank,
Hmm.
right? Um, at the same time, you can build, alcohol, higher alcohols with your grain bills, etc. And in the end, it makes the brewery much more efficient, especially since they're making these huge volumes of beer at a single whack.
Would you say that that changes the taste profile of the beer by doing it that way, and then adding water versus just, I don't want to say brewing. What'd you say, at sales strength?
Sales strength or sales gravity. I think, if it's done correctly, it shouldn't.
Okay.
But there's a lot of brewers that might not know how to scale it correctly, and sort of there may be changes that you have to make in fermentation because of the grain bill change. And so, if you're not tuned into all of those things that have to be adjusted, it won't turn out the same. So that's why, the histories with these big breweries, they've done a lot of research on it.
Right. When are they adding the water? Because I'm imagining a bartender, topping off, your drink with a little tonic water at the end. Like, how does that work? Is it
Yeah.
mixed in
So
and brewed together, and
it's done late in the finishing process. So you do the filtering, and there's all sorts of inline alcohol measurement, so you know exactly what your alcohol is at every point in the process. And say I'm trying to get a 5% alcohol, and my high gravity beer is at 8%, right? So I filtered that high gravity beer. Now it's clear beer, but it's still high alcohol. So I start to add water to that, and as it comes off my filter, I can dial it into exactly 5%
Mm,
ABV, and at the same time, there could be carbonating, etc. But that so it's added, it's put into a tank, so it's in its finished sales gravity or sales um, strength before it goes into a keg or a bottle or a can.
got it. Interesting. Sorry, I kind of interrupted, the process. Okay, we've added the hops, we've cooked it. Now we need to do some fermentation, right?
Yeah. So typically fermentation depends on what type of beer you're making, but it could be as short as say 14 days, or it could go weeks depending on what you're trying to make.
Okay.
Um,
What's going to be like a long fermentation versus a short fermentation?
so a long fermentation, I would say in the primary fermenter is probably 14 days, and then you have a secondary fermentation which might go months.
And what's
Um,
like, what kind of beer is that going to make me?
Typically, the longer fermentations are lagers, the shorter fermentations are ales.
Interesting, because I'm not really deep into beers, but those feel like they're a little bit similar to me almost.
They are. A lot of it is, yeah. That's a really interesting comment because a lot of it is very similar, to be honest. But there are different yeast strains that you use for ale. They like warmer temperatures versus a lager likes colder temperatures, and you do get a different sort of profile in terms of the nose or the esters that are produced, etc. So there is some differences, but there have been many a brewer that have had to make an ale with a lager yeast. I can tell you that. So
Okay.
um, yeah,
So it's going to get fermented. What's happening like chemically and you're introducing your own yeast? Where's the yeast come from? Like, do you have to make that?
yes.
Is Anheuser-Busch making that yeast
So
themselves?
they have their own proprietary yeast, and they keep that under lock and key. They propagate it and culture it in St. Louis, and then they
So that's
send it
the
off.
that's the Coca-Cola secret formula right there is the yeast.
Yeah, yeah,
Everything else
yeah,
is kind of just like, yeah, I mean, every brewer kind of knows how to make an ale, like you said, a pilsner,
yeah.
whatever.
So they typically, and Coors has the same thing, and many brewers, even the craft brewers, will have their own proprietary yeast.
Interesting.
So you maintain it once you put it into a fermenter. Say I put 10 pounds of yeast into a fermenter, I'll get like 50 pounds back because as the yeast consumes the sugars, it makes heat, it makes CO2, it makes alcohol, and it makes other yeast cells.
Right.
And so you can crop that yeast off, and then you can use that yeast to pitch other or inoculate other fermenters. And then every now and then you introduce a new culture and start the whole process over again.
Interesting. Okay, so the yeast goes in, and the yeast is doing what? It's eating and
Yes.
replicating essentially.
Yeah. So it's an anaerobic, so an oxygen-free sort of metabolic cycle that yeast get into, and that's what allows it to make the alcohol. And so the yeast cells. Say I put in, um, just for round numbers. Say I put in 10 yeast cells. Those yeast cells at first they're slow. They're getting acclimated to the new fermenter, to the new wort stream, and then they'll start to multiply and they'll start to take off. And you'll
Mm,
see it's like a bell curve. And after say three days, 4 days, you'll have a peak number of cells, and it might be 10 times that number that you inoculated. It might be more than that.
so it won't just keep going. It'll top off, and then the yeast will be like, "This is about as much yeast as we can handle in this tank."
Yeah, especially because if you put too much yeast in up front, um, they'll overcompete, and the fermentation actually won't finish because it runs out of other nutrients or oxygen, or because at first you're putting oxygen in, it consumes that oxygen and then it goes anaerobic. If you put too many if you put too many yeast cells in early, um, the cells don't get enough oxygen to start the process correctly, and then they can't finish.
Hmm.
If you don't have enough yeast cells, it has a similar you can have similar issues.
Hmm.
So it's a very precise I guess science that in making beer. And so I've been fascinated by that process for my entire career, and so I love talking about it.
Yeah. Well, so have humans for what, like thousands of years? Isn't that like some of the
Yeah,
first written records? Is like people getting their payments in beers?
yeah, exactly. Yeah, and
Isn't it like the
the Egyptian,
Mesopotamians got paid like, a
absolutely.
certain amount of beer, and it was like an important part of their diet actually because it was carbs, protein, and I think like
Yeah,
B
and it
vitamins.
was safe to drink because water
True.
back then was you were rolling the dice
Yeah.
with potential dirty water. that you-
So the yeast goes in, it eats, it consumes. Let's say the right ratios are there, and then what has to happen? Do we have to get rid of yeast, or how do
Yeah,
we finish the beer off?
yeah. So typically, as you go through a fermentation, let's say I started at 50 degrees Fahrenheit, and I let that the yeast will start to produce heat. So you got to control the temperature. Say I control it at 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Um, and then all of a sudden the yeast has consumed all of the carbohydrate. You'll start to see yeast dropping out of solution. So it stays, the lager yeast in particular, will stay in solution. And then when the yeast runs out of nutrient, it'll start to fall to the bottom of the tank.
Hmm.
Ye- Ale yeast typically floats to the top, and lager yeast will fall to the bottom.
Hmm.
So so it starts to fall. So to assist that separation of the yeast from the beer, so it's gone from wort, and now you added yeast, it now becomes beer. Um, you put on the glycol jackets that are on a fermenter, and we call it crash cooling that fermenter. So we take that fermenter, say, from 60 degrees back down to, say, 45 degrees, and that causes the yeast to sort of drop out of solution.
Hmm.
Then you can collect that yeast and pitch it through another fermenter. Or
So that yeast can be reused then, even if it's like drowned at the bottom.
yep, yep, you can. Yeah, so if you've done the fermentation correctly, you're harvesting that yeast at the right time. It's very good for fermenting the next batch.
It's already been trained. It already knows what to do, right?
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yep. And then we take that product and that beer that's in that tank, and we run it through a set of filters in order to make sure we get all the yeast out and make the beer clear. There's certain, types of beers that would, Hefeweizen, for instance, you might keep the yeast in it. Um, you can see some of those beers that you might have, like a Blue Moon Belgian White is
Hmm.
a brand that I worked on. Um, that had yeast carryover that we wanted in that final product.
Interesting.
Um, but most beers are clear. So you filter it, and that's when, during that filtration process, if the alcohol needs to be adjusted, that's where it's done,
Hmm.
and then it gets carbonated and it's put into a tank.
How's it carbonated?
Well, it depends on the brewer. You can naturally carbonate, because the yeast is always producing CO2 as it ferments. It's one of the um, byproducts of fermentation. So if you can manage that level of CO2 in your beer. You won't have to add any at the end of the process.
So, like,
Um,
let's say you took the yeast out. Like, how's that work? The CO2 is captured inside the bottle when you seal it.
Yeah, yeah. So the CO2 actually gets integrated into the liquid. It gets absorbed into the liquid,
Hmm.
and so it, yeah, it's present in the beer after the yeast is removed, and and then you can put it into a package, and that's where it gives you that effervescence, in a beer.
Yeah, but also you can probably add it, um, just
Yeah, if you needed to,
manual
you could add it.
carbonation.
Yeah, in the fermentation process, there's so much CO2 that is created that a lot of brewers, especially the big ones, they can capture that CO2, and they can then use that CO2, which is naturally produced, to sort of pinpoint carbonate if they need to,
Oh,
um, on the back end. Yeah, a lot of brewers are actually selling their CO2 because they make so much CO2 you can't use it all.
Interesting. Huh. Well, I figure once you start doing things the level Anheuser-Busch does, if you can pinch a penny here or there, makes a big
Yeah,
difference.
yeah.
Interesting. So why would you need to add CO2? Is there a particular reason?
It just depends on, it depends on how your process works. A lot of times if you're adding CO2 in those big breweries, it's maybe just a little because you've got CO2 coming with the beer just to get it exactly where you want it.
I see.
But it's pretty straightforward process.
Hmm. That's fascinating. So tell me about what life was like working and doing the White Claw thing. I mean, that was kind of a sensation. Still is a sensation. I mean, this is a product that I don't know what the stats are, but I'm sure for a lot of people, that's more of what they consume than a traditional Miller Lite, Bud Light, Modelo kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah. That the White Claw was such a crazy thing. That also that brand itself changed my life because it was crazy what happened. We
How'd you get hooked up with them?
um I guess I got recruited. I was working for Miller Coors at the time, and I got recruited by them. They were establishing a bigger presence in the United States. This was gosh, 2012 or so, something like that.
Hmm.
So they were trying to establish a larger
Are
presence,
they a
and so
foreign company?
they actually are out of Canada.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Who
yeah,
knew?
out of Vancouver.
Is it called White Claw also in Canada?
Well, like the parent company is called Mark Anthony Group or Mark Anthony Brands, and so they hold they're sort of the, I guess, holding company for several companies underneath.
Got it.
Um, and so White Claw came along at a time when this company that Mark Anthony makes Mike's Hard Lemonade, and that was their big brand up until
Ah,
White Claw.
yes.
And so White Claw came along, and we wanted to do a 30,000 case test market run, and this was, I guess, it had to be, gosh, I don't know. I forget. It's probably 8 years ago now, or something like that. That 2016 or so. Um, that White Claw came along. So we want to do a 30,000 case test market. Next thing you know, we sold 3 million cases, and
Crazy.
so then they said, you know what? Let's do 6 million next year, and we did 12,
Mm,
right? And then next thing you know, within like 4 years, we were at 80 million cases. It
jeez.
was crazy.
So when they
And
first brought you that product and they're like, "We want you to kind of work on this," what was your impression of it? I mean, you're very, you've been in the brewing industry a long time. Are you a purist? Are you like, this isn't really like what I'm into, or what was your thoughts?
yeah, well, I had done work on, we called it clear beer when I was at Anheuser-Busch in the research brewery back in 1989.
Okay.
They were playing with this, trying to, where they were making, alcoholic beverages out of malt that were clear. So I was familiar with it. So I'm like, you know what, we can figure this out. We'll,
So
we'll
so it's so what is a malted, like, because when I hear malted, my brain immediately goes to like getting sick in college drinking malt liquor. Like what what it like when you say it's a malted beverage, obviously you just explained that beer is brewed with malt, but what does that mean exactly?
Yeah, so this is so White Claw, in a broad technical sense, is a beer actually.
Okay.
So it starts as a beer formula, and then you using filters and carbon, for instance, you can take color out of it, and you can take flavor out of it. So White Claw is done that very way. There's a large amount of adjunct in it. There's some malt in it.
What's
Um,
adjunct? What does that mean?
Adjunct is like any carbohydrate that isn't malt.
Okay, so like a
So
corn or something.
yeah, yeah. And so, but what that does for you is it gives you alcohol with a whole lot of nothing else, right? It's like pure alcohol that you can produce from it. And so we built a formulation, trying to hit certain targets for flavor and color and et cetera. And we, in fact, we have patent. I have a patent on some of the way we produced White Claw,
Mm.
um, and in the end, it's similar but different than making a traditional beer, um, and and but it was, at the time when we introduced it, it turned out to be a very it was one of those brands that it still is, that sort of the men and the women could agree on, right? You couldn't that's hard to come by in a lot of,
Yes, most
you know
definitely.
what I mean? Especially at those price points, right?
Especially
You know,
alcohol, that's a weird thing too, right? Like, if you think of, like, soda, like, there's no masculine. I guess maybe you think, like, Mountain Dew is kind of masculine, but, like, it's not more women drinking Diet Coke than men, I'm guessing, or
right,
Pepsi or anything like
right.
that. But when it comes to alcohol, like, if I say whiskey, you're, like, masculine. If
Mhm,
I say vodka, you're, like, maybe feminine. If I say, like,
mhm.
beer, you're, like, masculine. Like, wine, a little bit more feminine. White wine, definitely feminine. Red wine, maybe a little more masculine, right? Like,
Right.
and that's just a strange thing about alcohol, that there's, like, a gender identity tied up in it.
No, it is true, and I think what we hit on with White Claw was, the dudes wanna be drinking with their girls, right? And so the girls are like, "I like White Claw." Okay, I can live with that. If you can live with it, I can live with it. And I
Yeah.
think that's what got it to take off. And this was during COVID, you know. It was so there was a lot of pantry stuffing that went on back then.
Mhm.
And, we were on, like, high alert for a couple of years. Every case that we made was actually pre-sold because we couldn't keep up with the demand.
Wow.
And, and we had, like, there was I think it was the University of Georgia. There was a fraternity that they interviewed, and I forget, it was CNN or somebody. Um, and they were talking about, they're talking about the phenomenon of White Claw, and they were like, "Yeah, we hate White Claw." He's like, "Why do you hate White Claw?" Because after White Claw came out, that's all the girls wanted to drink, and instead of being able to pour up a punch bowl, we had to go buy White Claw, and so their cost of goods went up to throw a party.
Yeah, right, right.
and
That's
and
true. You could buy some pretty low quality vodka and jazz it up with some Hawaiian punch.
yeah, and so they actually were buying by the pallet,
Jeez.
um, because they got a discount, I guess. I don't know, but anyways, it was this really great experience. It grew so fast that we built 3 breweries in 3 years. 2 of them are over 1,000,000 square feet.
Whoa.
The other small one is 500,000 square feet.
Is White Claw distributed, worldwide now?
It's distributed in select countries. It hasn't made full penetration across the globe, but I'm sure they will at some point.
Wow.
Yeah.
Awesome. That's crazy. Yeah, so, like, what was, you didn't tell me what your impression of it was.
Of White Claw?
Yeah, like, when you first, I know you said you looked at that
Oh,
for Anheuser-Busch. I don't know
yeah.
if the '80s would have been the right time for it, but I think you guys hit it at the right time, clearly, with White Claw.
Yeah. Yeah, we did. I mean, I actually liked it. I still, I'm not a big drinker in general anymore. I used to be, right? I mean,
That's the beer
it
fest joke, like,
yeah.
they make a couple 100,000 beers a day, and I pull 30, 40 off the line, and I'm the bad guy, right? Like,
Yeah.
I'm drinking 30 or 40, who cares?
So, yeah, but I like I said, it was a great experience to work on White Claw and to help, drive the formulations and so forth. And it became a category, which, basically it established a new category in alcohol, which is, who does that? I mean, nobody, when was the last category ever created?
Yeah.
You know?
No.
And so, and one of the things you mentioned, the Mesopotamians, right? White Claw grew faster than any alcoholic beverage, and maybe any beverage, since the Mesopotamians were spitting in pots to make the first beers,
Wow.
right?
That's
That's how
crazy.
fast that growth was. And they're still doing well. The market itself, the seltzer category, has shrunk a little bit, and
Interesting.
everybody and their brother jumped into it, right?
Yes,
And
yes.
so but White Claw is, I think it's probably over 60% of what's left of that category. And every year it seems like their piece of the pie gets a little bit bigger. Although the competitors are falling off and so forth.
Yeah, and there's some products that are similar but not the same, like a High Noon. That's like a vodka seltzer. It's not. I
Yeah,
don't, from what I understand, that's not a brewed product.
right. Well, yeah, it's not brewed like a beer. Yeah, so it's a distilled product. So they're making so they make so the way a vodka is made is they'll take their carbohydrate, they'll ferment it just like a beer, but then after you filter it, they take that product and they run it through a still, and they concentrate the alcohol off, and that gives you that's why vodka's so clean, is because the way you can fractionate a distillation to get pure alcohol. Um, and that so with those spirit based ready to drink drinks, those RTDs, um, they are in some ways for in some ways they're a little easier to make because you're using a finished alcohol
Hmm.
already instead of sort of
Brewing from the start. Yeah.
yeah.
Did you ever play around with any spirit like making?
Oh yeah, yeah. I allegedly I have couple stills here at the house. So,
I see. All right.
but in fact, when I was at Mark Anthony, I built a pilot brewery. We spent $20 million building a pilot brewery, and we put in a pilot distillery in there as well. So we got to play around a lot with different types of carbohydrates, different types of spirits, um, and so forth. And so it's one of the things that I'm really proud of in my career is establishing that pilot brewery and distillery, because it became a place for teaching people how to make our products. And basically it gave a lot. My goal in creating that program there was to have more people understand the process, so that they could go, if they were in a meeting and somebody said, "Oh, we do this and this," they could call bullshit, right? Because a lot of times there were assumptions being made about what could be done and couldn't be done in our process, and
Mm,
decisions were being made that we would then have to live with and have to figure out,
mm.
we committed to that, right? So
Well, give me an example, like what, like flavors or alcohol contents or just
well, yeah, I mean,
products that some exec goes, well, let's do this, and everyone's like, that's a great idea, and you're like, that's not easy to do
yeah.
scientifically.
Yeah, so there's a limit to certain, how high you can get an alcohol without major interventions in terms of in a fermentation. If you can get alcohol higher through distillation, but with fermentations, there is a limit. There are ways to increase that alcohol level, but they're costly, and so things like that. I was in charge of technical services for the company as well. So we had corporate brewing was under me, corporate packaging was under me, and there might be, hey, let's put a 30% alcohol version of say White Claw or Cayman Jack into a can, right? And so I caught wind of this at one time, that they were thinking of some high alcohol stuff,
It would have been
and
like what, like a mixer or like something you would.
yeah, yeah, or just a straight up high alcohol product, that had been considered. And
30%'s a lot. I mean, if you
there,
drink 6 or 12 ounces of that, that's a lot.
yes, so it might be, it would be at the time. I think it was, I think at the time it was originally, it's like, could we do a 25% alcohol? Right? It was like, yeah, no, you can't really do that. Plus, on top of that, the can makers, who they won't warranty the can if the alcohol gets too high.
That makes sense. Yep.
So you got those are the type of considerations that you have to take into account. It's not a problem with a bottle, of course, but with a can, it's a different story.
What's kind of the natural limit of like a alcohol content for a beer before you, like you said, you major interventions?
Yeah, the highest we would go is about 20%.
Okay, so that's higher than I thought. I mean, that's high.
Yeah, yeah, and that's tough to get to, but there are, and to get it to go any higher at scale is really difficult. You
So
might be able to. might be able to do it on a small scale, but not really at a huge scale.
So what's like wine doing that's getting to those higher percentages? I think wine's like 18 to 20, right? It's kind of in that.
Yeah, it can be, but typically wine, unless they're fortifying the wine with some sort of, nutrient for the yeast, etc., it's not going to get much higher than that, and it's being packaged probably closer to 13 or 15%.
Okay.
Yeah,
So it's basically
uh,
a similar process with wine. Is that reasonable to say?
it is. Yeah,
But
yeah.
grapes instead of like a barley or a malt.
Right. With wine though, all of the sugars are created on the vine and the fermentable sugars. And with barley, you have to create the fermentable sugar. That's why there's a cooking process with beer. And so with wine, you just have to crush the grapes. I shouldn't say that way. You crush the grapes, and that produces the juice that has the sugar content. Whereas in beer, you have to convert those starches into fermentable sugars.
Interesting. So you said you retired, but I know you're not really retired. You got a project that you're working on. Like, how did that all come about?
Yeah, that's another interesting story. My son Christian, who is my business partner, his about 6 years ago, it was during COVID. His wife goes into labor. They're having their first daughter, and he's in the hospital, and um, he goes downstairs. He wants to get himself an energy drink. Um, he goes to reach into the cooler, and he realizes he's about to grab like a cotton candy flavored energy drink.
Of course, of course.
And he said to himself, "Holy crap! What am I doing? I'm about to become a dad, and I'm going to drink a cotton candy energy drink." So anyways, we get talking about this a couple weeks later, and I'm like, you know what? We could create our own energy drink, one that's natural, that's targeting adults. We can leave they can have all the kids. We'll take the adults.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's when we started to percolate this idea, this concept. And so I formulated the first formulas for our product, which is called Motion.
How different
And
is formulating that? I mean, it's got to be quite different from formulating a beer because the beer is like got this process, and this is mostly just mixing. Am I correct in saying that?
that is correct, right? So it's a matter of sourcing ingredients in order to make the finished product that you want. So we knew we wanted to be Whole Foods compliant, for instance. Whole Foods
Yep.
is very difficult to get into. Um, they like to look at the label and make sure that you don't have any bad ingredients and things like that, which we appreciate, right? So we took the Whole Foods standard and we said, I'm going to formulate to make sure we meet Whole Foods. And so, for instance, we use no synthetic ingredients at all, no preservatives, no artificial colors, and that's pretty far afield, to be honest, for as compared to historical traditional energy drinks.
Yeah.
There are some,
Most of the ones you're going to find at a gas station have sucralose in them. I would say 9 out of 10, maybe 10 out of 10, honestly. If
yeah,
they're sugar free, that is. If you're
yeah,
sugar, that's a different story. But
yeah. So the sugars, typically, comes from cane sugar or beet sugar, but sucralose is an artificial sweetener.
of
We
course,
we we have a non-nutritive natural sweetener, which is stevia, because it's made from a stevia plant. But the truth is that if you look at the better for you, in quotes, energy drinks out there today, um, it's it feels like almost every ingredient in there, except for the water, is synthetic, and that's
yes, I would
frightening,
tend to
right?
say so. Yes.
Yeah. So synthetic caffeine, synthetic taurine, synthetic preservatives, artificial colors, and it's a little frightening, to be honest. And so, in fact, we wanted to formulate in a way that we could look the consumer in the eye and say, look, if this is healthy, we're not posing as a clean label. We are actually a clean label.
Mm-hmm.
And we call it clean washing, actually,
Mm-hmm.
because a lot of these labels, like, oh, that's good enough. The consumer doesn't care. Well, the consumer does care,
Yeah,
and it's going. And we think that the market is shifting towards products like ours.
definitely. I would
Um,
tend to agree with you.
yeah. Are you familiar with the Yuka app, the YUKA? It's an app that you can get on your
I feel
phone.
like I just heard about this recently. I feel like someone else told me, or I heard on a podcast about the Yuka app.
Yeah, so it's an app that you can scan a barcode, and it'll basically give you a rating. If they've assessed the product, it'll give you a rating if this thing's good, bad, excellent, that sort of thing. And as it turns out, we are the highest scoring energy drink on the Yuka app.
That's amazing. I just downloaded Yuka. I'll fact check him in
Yep.
real time here, everybody.
Yep.
But no, that's amazing. Yeah, that's so funny that the Yuka app. I just heard about that like within the last couple of
Well,
days.
it's got like 85 million users now
Wow.
around the world. And so this is legit, right?
Is
I
it
mean,
just food, or are they doing cosmetics and stuff like
they
that
do,
too?
yeah, food and cosmetics,
Hmm.
and it'll give you a score, and then it's I think it's bad, poor, good, and excellent. It's pretty basic, but it'll give you a score, and it'll give you an actual number, and it'll give you a rating. And we score we fall just below excellent, because we haven't certified organic,
Yeah.
but if we did, we would be in the excellent
So
rating.
you seem like a guy who knows a ton about the packaging side, because you just talked about the cans. It sounded like that was a big part of your job. Also, was like the cans.
Yep.
Are there any cans that are like better for you? Because from what I have come to understand, the inside of the cans, a lot of them are lined with either chemicals or plastics or preservatives or some sort of a mechanism that will kind of keep the product fresh. One, am I correct in saying that? And then two, are there better for you cans out there that you know of?
Yeah, you hit on a really good point. So there are cans that have the old school liners that they used would have some chemicals in there that were you'd consider bad. What's happened since probably around 2005 2006, there was a strong push to get all of those out. So now the liners are pretty much made with um, it's not chemical free, but where they're not made with anything of these forever chemicals or Bipani, that sort of thing. And so the liners today, the technology in them is really good. Now that because they've removed those chemicals, that makes that liner harder to apply to a can. So it because of the technology for spraying and et cetera, the geometry of cans has affected the way these liners are being applied.
Mm,
Because we have the sleek the 12-ounce sleek can
yep.
versus the industry standard, which is a little stocky can.
Yep. Right.
Yep. Yeah. So those cans are easier to apply liners to,
Interesting.
and yeah, and because of their geometry, and
It's
so
just
you
harder
get
to get
the
like down into the
yeah.
bottom of a 12-ounce long can. It's more like a pipe than a can, right?
Absolutely. So that now you need 2 nozzles instead of 1,
Mm,
right? And they gotta be positioned correctly. Then you put on top of that a formula for a liner that's harder to actually spray in general and to coat.
mhm.
So it becomes a trickier process for the can makers. Um, but I do think that the can liners today are excellent,
Okay.
and that some of the issues that concern people even 5 years ago don't exist today.
So like what are like I guess for my FYI, what are those can liner? Like what is it, a chemical that I would understand? Is it something really simple?
Yeah.
Like, and what would happen if they didn't do anything to that can liner?
So if you don't do anything, the materials in the can will eat through the can.
Mm,
They'll corrode the can. That's the challenge, right? You
okay.
get it. There's acidity in the beverages. There's electrolytes and so forth, and those all interact with aluminum. Aluminum, corrodes easily,
Mm,
and so that's why you have to have these liners in there.
hmm. What do you know what they're made out of, those liners?
Honestly, some of them are, I guess, epoxy based. Some of them are, I'm not a full expert on them. I know that the liners have been modified to take out some of these chemicals that were concerning, and in other packaging materials as well, like PFAS on cartons, etc. On different types of materials has been removed in order not to contribute to PFAS in the environment.
Yeah, here's what
Um,
I'm reading. Plastic-based barriers prevent acidic contents of the drink, such as soda, beer, juice, from corroding the aluminum, which protects both the taste of the beverage and the integrity of the can. These epoxy linings historically contain bisphenol A, BPA. However, due to consumer health concerns, many manufacturers have shifted to BPA alternatives like acrylics or modified polyesters, which are approved. Kind of still sounds like maybe those are some type of plastics, but
yeah, I think in general, in the trick with the trick with the liners is they have to also be flexible, right?
mm,
So because of the way the cans are handled, and so they got to be sort of malleable but impermeable. So
it's tough,
it's a
tough science.
it's a, it is, and my hat is off to them because it is a hard thing to do, but and in order to meet the consumer demand today in California, for instance, you have to declare if you don't have a Bipani um, free can, you're supposed to placard the cooler and say, hey, this might contain something that's not good for you, right? So pretty much the industry is converted to Bipani free liners. So
Interesting. Yeah, I that's something that I kind of wonder about because I'm a real kind of up on the plastic free kind of life and living. I actually have a patent on a plastic free all glass food storage container, and me and my wife are trying to get pregnant, so I'm like trying to convince her like let's try to get like, and we're not bad like by any means, but like let's try to remove some plastics from my environment. And she's like, I'm not going to stop drinking Fresca, Alex. Like I'm not doing that. And I'm like, okay, well, that's fine. But yeah, I guess I just didn't know what those cans were lined with, or if there are like better for you liners. So yeah,
yeah,
where do you foresee the brand going? The Motion brand.
well, we just launched in November, and so right now, for instance, we're on Amazon. We do some selling through our own website. We're starting to get into some retail around where I live and
Mm-hmm.
so forth. And but we're meeting with retailers, major retailers now for 2027,
Okay. Yep.
um, and so we think that. Probably within a year and a half, we should have some national distribution in some stores that you've heard of. But we're trying to talk to, major grocers, major big box retailers that carry energy drinks currently, and we see that coming along nicely, actually.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about the product. I see you guys talk a lot about the shisho. What is
Yeah.
what
So
is that?
so so shisho is a botanical and Eastern herb, really, and it's if you eat sushi, you probably had it. It's often served. Sushi's often served at the higher end restaurants on top of shiso leaves,
Hmm.
etc. But it's a botanical that provides some immunity support. It's an antioxidant. It helps with digestion, that sort of thing. And this formulation, the entire formulation was inspired actually. It's actually inspired from my mother because when I was little, I'm Filipino and Portuguese, and I was born over in the Philippines, and when my mother, who was this 4'9" little Filipino woman, uneducated, when we came over from the United States to the United States, her whole thing was the only thing she really understood was this Eastern medicine approach to wellness.
Mm.
And so when I was little, when we got sick, she would be whipping up a cocktail of echinacea, elderberry, ginseng, zinc, and that's what we took, vitamin C, B. So if you look at the label, that's actually all the ingredients that are in this product.
Mm.
So we use the Eastern medicine approach to try to do sort of a daily immune support system that had a caffeine boost to it as well. And so that's what this energy drink is formulated around.
Awesome. How old's your son?
He is now 38 years old.
What's it like
Yeah.
working with him?
Yeah, it's good. We spend half our time trying to make each other laugh, right?
Laughter is
Uh,
a good. I was just in a
yeah,
business, and one of their core values was laughter. I was like, that's a good core value. Not enough businesses have that one.
yeah. And so, he's got a great background that complements mine. I'm kind of a techie, right? Not high tech, like low tech, brewing kind of science tech. Um, he was a marketing undergrad, got a minor in theater, went on to get an MBA as well as a master's in fine arts in film production.
Mm.
And so he's very much a creative guy.
Hmm.
And so it sort of balances against my sort of kind of black and white linear kind of thinking kind of guy. He's got the lateral creative mind. And so it's been great working with him. And he's done a lot to help build this brand, make the brand into what it is.
Well, the branding looks great. I really like the branding.
Yeah, we wanted to have this. We call it a nostalgic look, and
I like that.
it's what we mean by that is it might, for anybody who hadn't been alive during the '70s or so, this would make you nostalgic for an era that you might not have actually lived through, right? And
Hmm.
that's our so that retro look to our can is very intentional. Um, the other thing you'll notice about the can is we don't make a lot of labels. We don't make a lot of claims
Hmm.
because it just clutters up the can,
Yep.
right? Like we don't want to be a pharmaceutical billboard. We just want some to be something that you reach for on your commute. A nurse, a musician, a truck driver, right? And they can all be. You can get a better for you energy drink, a clean label energy drink that's affordable and provides you this daily immunity support. And who doesn't need that, right?
All right, I'm gonna buy some. Which one's your favorite flavor? It looks like your variety pack's out of stock on Amazon. We could probably help you out with that. But which one's your favorite?
Well, the white peach is probably the one. I just did some tastings. I was doing tastings on July 4th at a couple different places around here, and they all do very well. Actually, even on Amazon, they score well. But white peach seems to be the fan favorite. Blueberry pomegranate is another one. But my own favorite is the mandarin, um, and then we have a strawberry guava as well. But if you give me your address, I'll send you a variety pack.
Don't worry, I'm gonna buy it for you so that you guys can get the review. I got you on that front if I can remember our Amazon login password here. Um, no, that's awesome. That's amazing. The energy drink space is a lot of fun. Obviously, you know it. You've been in beer. You've been in energy drinks. Like every space is competitive. There's no space that it's like, oh, this is so easy. I'm just gonna waltz in and make my millions. Um, but I think the one thing that I've learned time and time and time again is if the product tastes good, like people will come back to it. And I'm sure you know that coming in the beer world, like when products taste good, people will buy them. So
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's what it comes down to for us. We want to have a genuine and sort of authentic product. Our names are not anything but the name of the fruit that's in there, right? We make it with natural juices and this organic green tea caffeine and then these other functional ingredients. Um, but it's a very clean flavor. The comment that a lot of people had over this weekend when I was doing the tastings was that they feel like it to them tastes more like a seltzer than it does an energy drink
hmm,
because the energy drinks are so loaded with these flavors because a lot of the ingredients in these energy drinks don't taste good on their own, so you got to load up with sugars or artificial flavors in order to mask some of that. Um, and what we're proud of is that we're not trying to mask anything,
mhm.
right? This what you see is what you get type of thing.
That's awesome, man. Well, I got 12 coming. They'll be here tomorrow, so I'm excited. Well, Tony, thank you so much, man. It was super fun getting a chance to know you and chat with you from Anheuser-Busch to White Claw to Motion, man. That's awesome.
Yeah, Alex, I really do appreciate the time that you invested in us here. I mean, this has been great, and love to keep you posted on our progress.
Please, please.
And would look forward to hearing about what you thought of the white peach. Or
well, hey, if it's in my town, you guys are my guys. I would definitely grab it on the shelf if and when you get to Columbus, Ohio. Awesome. Thank you, Tony. Have a great night, man.